All right. Welcome back to the Dare to Dream podcast. We are at it again. We had some tech issues, but Kate, thank you so much for being here with us today. This is going to be a blast.
Already is. The tech issues, we just got to roll with it. It's life.
Tech issues cannot stop us. So we're going to dive straight in because we already chatted a little bit. And I'm going to start with a relatively heavy question. We'll use it as a springboard to dive headfirst into today's conversation. How does that sound?
Let's dive right in.
Okay. Okay. So I was doing my homework on you and what you're up to, and I learned that in the span of 6 months, three of your friends died in unrelated and unexpected tragedies. This is heartbreaking, and I would love to learn a little bit more about what happened and then what happened to you after that.
So this is really my origin story, as kind of as a human, really, and definitely is how I came into this work as an inspirer. So inspirer is the title that I made up and gave myself. Anyone else is welcome to take that for yourself if you feel like that's the line of work that you're in. We can like form a team, but yeah, this was 10 years ago when I really had my first awakening as an adult. I would say I kind of felt like I was sleeping before this, but it really started with, in like you said, in 6 months I had three of my friends that just died in unrelated, unexpected events. One of them was my boss at Google. He died when he was on vacation. One of them was an old friend of mine from college. She died literally walking across the street. She got hit by a drunk driver. And the third one was I was married at the time, my husband's cousin, so a close family member. He died of cancer. From diagnosis to the time he died, it was only 6 months. It was super fast. And this was not actually where the awakening happened, because after those three people died in such a short amount of time, and they were all around, like a young age, like late 20s, early to mid 30s. I don't know about how it was for you, but up until that point, when that was around my age, let's say I was like 28, I knew that I was going to die. Of course, like we all know we're going to die eventually, but I had never really like thought about or meditated or internalized the idea that it could happen at any time. And so when these three people died, that was when I, for the first time, realized, oh my gosh, yes, I am mortal, but it could actually happen when I'm 35, when I'm 40, not necessarily when I'm the American life expectancy of 87.5 or whatever it is today. So the first thing that happened was I went into a year of death anxiety. So I don't know if you can relate to this, or any of you listening can relate to a period in your life when you just got super afraid of death. Like you thought you were going to die at any moment. You were afraid of whatever, obscure cancer, brain eating amoebas, car accidents, but it affected my sleep. I didn't want to leave the house. I was scared of taking any risks or chances in my life. And what popped me out of that was so counterintuitive. I would have never been able to guess it. So the three friends died in 6 months. A year goes by. I'm in deep death anxiety, afraid of everything all the time. In that time, I met a colleague of mine at Google. He was the head of privacy at Google X, Dan Friedenberg, super cool guy. The literal antithesis to how I was living at that time. Dan was just living so vibrantly. He dated a celebrity. He opened a nonprofit. He opened up a co-working space in San Francisco. Then he announces that he is going to attempt to summit Mount Everest. So here's me, like living in my apartment, afraid to do anything, so scared of death and taking any chances or living my true self. Meanwhile, I'm watching Dan, this guy who I work with, who I just recently had met on social media, training for Everest and doing all this cool stuff. So I watched through his whole experience of training for Everest, flying to Nepal. He chronicled his experience up the mountain, and I was just like, wow, like the vibrance that this guy is living with is so inspiring and so cool. But unfortunately, the most counterintuitive thing happened, which is, it's not counterintuitive to think that someone who climbs Everest might die. But that's unfortunately what happened. On April 15th, 2015 was when the Nepal earthquake struck, 7.8 magnitude. Dan was high up at the climbers base camp at that time, and an avalanche was triggered, and Dan, along with many other climbers, was killed. And the counterintuitive part about that is that you might think that when Dan died, it would have just cemented this fear that I had that doing risky things and living your big true self actually results in dying. But the opposite happened, Gregory. Like, so crazy. I was overcome with this logical line of thinking that I was like, because Dan was a super smart guy, like head of privacy at Google X, all these cool side hustles, great approach to living. He was very thoughtful and methodical, and he always talked about calculated risk. So what I realized was that Dan knew that there was a chance he might not come down that mountain, but he still had to climb Everest because that was his truth. And I realized, like, here I am, like, living in fear when I am pretty klutzy. I could probably die climbing the stairs. And I just realized that we all have a limited quantity of time and energy in our lives. Those are our most precious resources. And here I was putting all of my precious time and energy into trying not to die. Dan was putting all of his precious time and energy into living his most vibrant life. I could die either way. I would much rather, it's a much better investment of that precious resource of time and energy for me to put it into living. And instead of being scared of dying, why don't I really realize my real fear, which is my fear of dying without ever having truly lived and truly lived my truth and figured out who the hell Kate Manser is. And so since that day, my whole life radically changed. That was 10 years ago, Gregory. And since then, I've taken more adventures and more wild risks and realized really what's truly important to me. And I mess up every single day, but now I have my North Star as to, how to live that is this just profound key to putting it all out there and living for love and the beauty of being alive.
Oh my goodness. I have so many things I want to say to this. I totally agree with you. I didn't expect the story to turn out like this, where I thought you would say, I saw Dan living his best life. He was out there. He was living a story worth telling. He was daring to dream, and that inspired you. But actually, the fact that he passed away doing this thing that he loved, getting out there, it sounds like that was the final straw. And I want to ask, was like that moment when you learned that he passed away, the next day, were you out and about, out of death anxiety, or was it a process? Did it take some time?
I literally remember the day. I mean, it was like I was reading the news on that day in April 2015, and I saw the headline. I went to Dan's Instagram, and already a post there from his sister saying that he had been killed. And I literally was laying on my bed. I laid back, and it was just this whole experience of, first I was so mad at him. I was so mad, like, God, you're so inspiring. And he wasn't just inspiring for me. He's the kind of person that he inspired so many people. But I just laid back and I was so angry at first. That was my initial emotion. Just, why did you have to do this? Like, why did you have to take this risk? But then again, I went to that logic of like, he knew that there was a chance. And then it was like this logic of that was his calculated risk. And then it was the logic of, here I am afraid of dying when I could die either climbing Everest or walking across the street. And that logical train of thought just got me to the point where I realized that I can put my energy into trying not to die, or I can put my energy into living. And since that day, I have to wake up every day and choose the latter. I have to choose to be grateful to be alive. I have to choose to put my energy into fear and creation and action and what nurtures my soul versus fear and hiding and holding back.
And I want to get into some of the stories of Kate 2.0 as you stepped out of the fear, as you stepped into your full life. But you said something that really struck me. You said you realized that you didn't want to get to the end of your life and realize that you were so afraid of dying that you never had the courage to really live. And I'm curious, did that come from research on the regrets of the dying? Because it's very similar to something that I experienced in my own life. Or was that just something you felt and it was almost like this inner knowing in you that woke up?
It was really this realization. So my main realization happened that day where I went from anger to, having this like logical thought process of like, oh, I have time and energy. Like, what am I going to do with it? and how is it best used. But then, of course, like I'm still integrating these realizations. Like 10 years later, the onion is still getting peeled back. But really, I think I thought that I was afraid of dying, and then after Dan died, I realized that like my true fear wasn't even really of dying. My true fear was dying without truly living. And when I realized that, that was like the sort of the fuel on the fire that was like, I'm scared of something. And it was coming to terms with that. I'm scared of something, but I would rather be use that fear productively. I would rather, instead of putting my energy into trying not to die, which is largely out of our control anyway, why don't I put my fear into that fear energy into, oh, I'm afraid of dying before or living, not living before I die. Guess what? That's 100% within my control. So why don't I just feed that fear? And I still feel like I have a certain amount of fear of not living before I die, but I feel like that can be used healthily and productively. And fear is just like, it's sort of this non-negotiable that we need to learn to like work with and befriend our enemy to a certain extent, and figure out how, if we have fear and if we're scared of something, and that sort of just is, how can we use that productively? How can we transform that into motivation to something that pushes us in the direction that we feel good and alive and productive?
Yes, I totally agree with that. We have to dance with the fear. We have to use fear as a compass to point us in the direction of all these things we want to do before we die, but we're currently afraid of. And I love that. And this might sound like a really obvious question, but right before this call, I got off a coaching call with an executive, and she's been in a situation that she doesn't like. She doesn't like her job. She's overworked. She's so burnt out. And she doesn't even have to be there. It came up today that she could retire easily. So it's not a money thing, but she's stuck and she won't do anything about it. And the question I have for you is, how did you actually gather, find, create that activation energy to change your entire life and change the way you were living? Because those same circumstances could have happened to someone else, and they might have had Dan's death as a confirmation that, see, if I try and get out of my comfort zone, if I try and live a big life, I too could die. And yet you flipped that on its head, and you use that as, again, that activation energy, that rocket fuel to change your life. So anything you can speak to that allowed you to do that, that might be helpful for other people.
Well, listen, I am a card carrying procrastinator first and foremost. So I can 1000% speak. I stayed in a marriage for 4 years longer than I should have. I knew that, like, in the last year at Google, that, like, it just wasn't feeling right. But so I stayed in that job for a long time. I procrastinate on stuff all the time. And so if you have procrastination tendencies, typically what motivates us card carrying procrastinators is a deadline, is some type of urgency. And so that's why soon after this thing happened, with Dan passing away and the realizations that I had, I came up with this phrase, which I'm sure I'm not the first person in history to utter it, but I started a blog. It was one day I just got hit with this bolt of lightning, like, oh my God, yeah, you might die tomorrow. And before Dan died, when I was in that deep death anxiety, the idea that I might die tomorrow was the scariest thing I could possibly think of. But after Dan died, and I had this whole perspective shift on what mortality can do for us while we're living, then the idea that I might die tomorrow became this like motivating deadline that busted through my procrastination and overthinking and decision paralysis. And so that is, I don't know, what this client is going through, and, all the nuts and bolts about it, but putting that deadline in place of, I don't know how long he has. I don't know how long I have. I don't know how long you have. So when I put that in place, it's like, oh, okay, it just cuts through that procrastination in a way that little else can. Like, what is more like inspiring than the fact of like, we might not literally be here. And even if you believe in reincarnation, right? Even if you believe that like we get to come back, we get another shot, we're never going to get another shot with like Gregory's beautiful hair and fantastic mustache and great qualities and leadership and your particular gifts and talents and idiosyncrasies. So even if you believe in reincarnation, like this iteration of ourselves in this life is such a limited time offer precious gift. And so that really motivates me to cut through. And so literally I will, when I'm stuck, I will imagine myself on my deathbed. I will really think like you might die tomorrow. And that's the thing is since I've been doing this project now for 10 years, I started the blog, then I started printing some stickers, people started buying stickers, people started buying t-shirts, then eventually I wrote a book and it just kept going and going from there. People tell me over and over again that that phrase comes up in times when they most need it. You might die tomorrow, live today. So I hope that anyone listening today, if you're needing that bolt of like motivation, that you can understand that death is scary, period, right? I'm not trying to say that it's only a motivating factor and it's not scary and it's not sad because it is. But if you can let the benefits of mortality awareness begin to infuse your life and the beauty of a natural of endings and beginnings, death and rebirth and these cycles and the fact that like we're going into winter now and then spring will come again and this, if you can really internalize that cycle of living and dying, ending and beginning, and the fact that we all have a deadline, it can radically change your life. And we'll go into how it has changed mine and some of the cool, crazy and tough times I've gone through in the 10 years since that happened.
I think we need to go there next, but if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that this thing that so many people, probably both of us included, are afraid of, death, you can use it as the ultimate motivating factor. You can use it as a way to break through all the noise, to break through your procrastination. And I love your catchphrase, you might die tomorrow. And I know, as you mentioned, you've written a book, which we'll get to, but that is so powerful because it adds a deadline. For me, when I hear you might die tomorrow, that is more powerful than another phrase about death that I really like. I like stoicism, and memento mori is remember you will die. But that's like
Hmm.
remember you will die someday. And this is you might die tomorrow. What are you going to do about it? Get out there and live. And so, two questions. I want to know what living alive means because that is part of your brand and what you talk about. And then let's use that to transition into some of these crazy, big, fully alive experiences that you've been doing over the past 10 years.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I've gotten a lot of pushback over the years from people who don't like this message, right? And at least I can say it's polarizing. At least I can say it gets people's attention and it's changed so many lives for the better. And I hear story after story of how it's helped people in a time of need, how it's helped them take the big leap. But I have a lot of people who say it's too direct, it's too scary, it's not, it doesn't fully you know hold space for the complexity that is the fact that we die. But I think we gotta go big or go home. And so
Yes.
I will take this, I will take you might die tomorrow to the grave. But I really want you to think, and I want everyone listening to think about living like you might die tomorrow in a macro perspective and a micro perspective, because some of the pushback that I've gotten over the years is, Kate, I can't just quit my job. I have X, Y, and Z responsibility. Kate, I can't just go on this trip because I have X, Y, and Z responsibility or limitation. Kate, I can't do this big crazy thing because of this. Now, I think that a lot of times we have limiting beliefs, but we all do have responsibilities. There's certain times that we can and can't do things. But that's why it's important to think about living like you might die tomorrow in a macro and a micro perspective. So, on the macro perspective, it's the bigger things, it's the major life changes, marriage, divorce, kids, no kids, jobs, hobbies, side hustles, big trips, starting the business, all of these things. These are some of the things that people think about when they think, oh, I might die tomorrow. Like I have to do this big, dream, and the Dare to Dream podcast, right? Like I'm sure you talk about this and this comes up a lot. And I think that a good, meaningful life is dotted with what I call big, meaningful things. These macro, live like you might die tomorrow, sort of like road less taken paths, and do those things. Great. Remove your limiting beliefs. Stop telling yourself you can't do them. If you can't do it today, make a plan for how you can make it happen in the next 5 years, right? Because, yeah, we might die tomorrow, but realistically, we're probably not going to. So dare to dream, do these big, crazy things when the time is right, when your gut is telling you to move forward, when you have enough drive over fear to make these big leaps happen. But do not overlook the micro everyday element of living like you might die tomorrow. Just think about it. Say you got a call from the doctor today that said, Gregory or Sarah or Jose or whoever's listening, you have 24 hours to live. Are you going to call the airline and book a flight to, Papua New Guinea or New Zealand or wherever? No. You're going to want to be with your people. You're going to want to go outside and look at the sky and the leaves and the twinkle in the eye of the person that you care about. You're going to want to do these micro, meaningful things that are, these things that make us feel in the present moment. So, really, don't forget about the macro and the micro elements of living like you might die tomorrow.
That's fantastic. I think that's the added nuance that needs to be in there, the macro and the micro. And I want to hear about some of your favorite big experiences. So take us away on whatever story you want to share next.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, I mean, the first thing I did was I went full eat, pray, love. I
Yes, I love that
decided
book.
to quit my job at Google and travel around the world. I had just always wanted to do that. And so I saved up my money and started travel hacking with like credit card points. And I ultimately, can we hold on for 1 second? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I hear someone knocking on the door.
RV life. I just got the security knock.
Does that mean you have to go?
Oh no, no. He was just doing his due diligence as a security guard. But where I was staying, as you can see, I live in this RV. Didn't have the best internet, so I came over here and yeah. So, but we were talking about crazy things, and this is actually a great segue. The fact that I just got the security knock on my RV because, like I said, I quit my job, traveled around the world. I was on this like spiritual journey. I came back when I ran out of money. I went back to corporate. And just a side note on this being the Dare to Dream podcast, when I quit my job at Google to travel around the world, so many people were like, how are you going to explain this on your resume when you need to go back to corporate? Like, this is going to be such a black mark on your like career. Like, how are you ever going to recover from this? It turned out when I came back, I applied for a global marketing manager job at Indeed. I was in marketing at Carl's Jr. corporate, at Google. I was in marketing and sales. So I applied for this global marketing manager job at Indeed corporate here in Austin. And they literally hired me because I had traveled around the world and had experienced all these cultures and had this like cultural sensitivity that other people hadn't had. So I just love sharing that anecdote because a lot of times we tell ourselves the reasons we can't do things, but ultimately it ended up helping me in my career. I didn't stay in corporate. That Indeed job was my last job at corporate. And then, I wrote a book. And then in 2022, I decided that I wanted to try RV life. So I've been in this RV now for 3 years. It's very rare that I get the security knock. It's literally like not very often, but it just so happened to be part of our experience today.
It's only when you're recording really, really good podcasts that it happens.
Yes. He just wanted to be a part of it. He's like, "Oh, I got to get in on that. Gregory's amazing."
He said, put me in, coach. So I want to slow down on one thing you said, that feared gap in the resume. It's what everyone's afraid of. When I quit my first job and was transitioning to my second job, everyone told me, how are you going to explain this 6 month gap? It's going to be the end of you. You've only worked for 1 year and then you're going to take a break. What are you doing? And same vein, different story. No one, I had probably 15 interviews to get my second job, and not a single person asked about it. So it wasn't even a problem. It wasn't even on their radar. And if it was, again, I had a story to tell. I had this life that I was living in those 6 months. It wasn't like I was just sat at home in my parents' basement. And I've heard this again and again. I've heard it from so many people that they actually value hiring people who have gaps if they went out and did something with their life. So the thing that you're most afraid of, having that gap in your resume, that black mark, that X, might actually, in your case, be the asset or the benefit that helps you get the role because you have a story to tell. And it sounds like it perfectly applied for what you were going to be doing.
Yeah, and I couldn't have predicted that, that it would, but I mean, now we have 2 stories here. And, we talk about differentiation, right? And this is something that I just wanna zoom out on because I think this is what we're talking about. Like I said, differentiation and being set apart, which is, in our lives as humans, we typically have this, like, deep desire to be remembered, to live a legacy or to leave a legacy, to be a memorable person who made a mark on the world. And yet we spend so much of our time and energy in life trying to be homogenous and trying to fit in and trying to dress like everybody else and not stand out too much and not be too loud or too different. When over and over again, I have seen in my life that the ones who are different, the ones who have the courage to dare to dream, the ones who have the courage to step out of the pack or the blueprint that everybody else is following, like we get rewarded, we get recognized, we get remembered. Look at Dan, for example. Dan is someone who he had a corporate job, a super corporate job at Google, but he was so memorable, not because he had a corporate job, but because of the way he approached it. He was such a playful, fun guy who just had this like vivaciousness. He approached life with humor and with joy. And had he just done the things that he had done, started the nonprofit, opened up the co working space, had the cool job at Google, I would have never remembered him. But the fact that he did it with this joy and this playfulness and this sense of courage, that is really what set him apart for me. And so I would just challenge you to really look at your values. And if your values, listeners, just like me, are to leave a legacy and to be remembered and to leave a positive mark on the world, to just really gauge how much energy you are putting in your life in trying to blend in and fit in and be like everyone else, and really be honest with yourself whether those are at odds or not. Because for me, I definitely found that once I started putting more energy into being myself and doing things for the joy of doing them and trying to differentiate myself, my life and my success have gotten exponentially greater.
I have so much energy around this because that has been the exact same experience for me. And that when I was trying to fit in, when I was trying to do what everyone else was doing, I was miserable. And I've always had this deep desire, this deep need to live an extraordinary life, to be uncommon. And nothing was working. I felt like I was so average, and all these big dreams I had for my life, I had no idea how they would come to fruition. And yet, when I decided to live a life true to myself, not the life others expect of me, that's when everything changed. That's when I became interesting. I started having these opportunities, these doors opened. I met the right people. And I truly think that it is through having the courage to be different, that differentiation factor, to follow your heart, because your heart is going to make you different than everyone else because it's so unique, and it's going to take you down a path that can only be yours. And it's when you do that that all of the things you want start to happen. Not before, not if you try and play it safe and be cookie cutter and fit in. It's really following your weirdness and the things that make you strange and different and amazing. So sounds like we have another similar experience there. This is why I was so excited to talk to you. I knew we are kindred spirits.
Oh my gosh, yes, and well said. I love that quote. Live a life. What was it again? Live a life that
So
others don't expect.
yeah, so it's actually, that's why I asked the question earlier, if your quote about I was afraid of dying without ever having the courage to really live. I asked if that came from the top 5 regrets of the dying, because the number one regret people have at the end of their life is I wish I would have had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expect of me. And when I heard that, it
Yes.
punched me in the face because I was like, "Oh crap. I'm I'm on the fast track to regret right now because I'm living a life for other people." And that's really what changed things for me.
Yeah, Bronnie Ware. Bronnie Ware is the hospice nurse, palliative care nurse who wrote that blog post that went viral
Yes.
before going viral was a thing. And so that's really what I want to talk about, because that was the next phase. So my first phase was really like recognizing mortality, beginning to integrate this idea of beginnings and endings and like death being a natural part of being alive into my life. And I spent several years on that. And while I was doing that, I was traveling around the world and blogging on the You Might Die Tomorrow blog and starting the movement, you know, people buying the t-shirts and the stickers and all of that. But what happened later on was a couple of things. After I stopped doing, or ended the first phase of doing the big macro, live like you might die tomorrow things, the quitting of the job, the start, the deciding to write a book, all of that. My life took this turn to really honing in on the experience of being alive. So one of the things that I did was I went to Thich Nhat Hanh's monastery in France called Plum Village, just on a whim. I didn't even really know who Thich Nhat Hanh was. If you don't know who he is a spiritual teacher who was actually in the 1960s nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King Jr. nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize, and he was actually excommunicated from Vietnam for his beliefs about freedom. And he is just a really profound leader, within Buddhism. He passed away a few years ago. When I went to Plum Village, he was still living, but he wasn't at Plum Village anymore. He had gone back to Vietnam for like the final years of his life. At Plum Village, we were meditating like most of the day. We also were introduced to something there, which Thich Nhat Hanh is very famous for, called a meditation walk. I didn't know what a meditation walk was, but from the first moment that I did a meditation walk, I was just hit with this profound realization of the beauty of being alive. And I had been focusing for many years on death and like this motivation to live thing. But when I started doing meditation walks, and you walk slowly through a forest or through your backyard or through your neighborhood or wherever, and you walk so slowly and you feel your feet on the ground and you listen to the leaves crunching and you feel the air on your skin and you look up at the sky and the clouds passing by, I was just struck with, this is living. This is this beauty, this gift that we have of being alive. And that was really what changed for me. And a few years after that, or actually right after I got back from Plum Village, I started leading meditation walks in Austin. And I led meditation walks in Austin for like 4 or 5 years. I took hundreds of people through a meditation walk experience to really think about what it means to be alive in the present moment. We can't always be skydiving or quitting jobs or taking trips, but to really be alive in the present moment is just the art of noticing and being and feeling grateful for that privilege. And that has really changed. And there was a while that I was really going by You Might Die Tomorrow. It was the title of my book. It was my Instagram handle. It was like, Kate is You Might Die Tomorrow. But then after some years, I ended up changing, and I still have You Might Die Tomorrow as a movement and a book, and there's a different Instagram handle for it. But I changed my Instagram to The Alive Kate. And now what I've been so passionate about for the past few years is studying what makes us feel alive. And that is everything from those big macro things to the tiniest, smallest moments where you just sit back and you're just aware of like, oh my God, I am alive. And this is just such a wild, crazy, gorgeous ride. And I'm so passionate about helping people experience that for at least one moment every single day.
It's such a powerful shift to still be talking about death, to still be talking about you might die tomorrow, but to shift into aliveness and what can you do today in this moment to feel more alive. And you mentioned Martin Luther King Jr. It makes me think of Howard Thurman, who was a mentor of Dr. King's. And one of his famous quotes, it's a quote that has been such a big part of my journey, was don't ask yourself what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, because the world needs more people who have come alive. And I really think that when people tap into what makes them come alive, what lights their soul on fire, that's when their superpowers come online. That's when all of the magic begins to happen. So I absolutely love this. And you have your Eat, Pray, Love era. You're traveling around the world. You're in an RV at times. You're at Plum Village. This all sounds so fantastic. How are you helping people today? You said for at least one moment or an hour or a day feel more alive? What does that look like?
Well, number one, first and foremost, I learned at Plum Village, I had this profound experience that changed the way that I look at how I help people and what is my opportunity to change the world. So when I was at Plum Village, at the end of the week that I was there, they posted a sign in the breakfast hall that said that anyone who wanted to could have a one-on-one with one of the nuns. So I'm a female, so I was with the nuns. If you were a man, you would have met with one of the monks. And I was like, this was at the point that I was just about to publish my book. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what my question's going to be. Because you could have a one-on-one with the nun and you were allowed to ask one and only one question. So I signed up immediately. So later that day, I go out and it's my turn to meet with the nun. And I walk out and she's sitting there under this beautiful fig tree on this warm, clear summer day. And she smiles at me. And I was a little surprised because she was younger than I thought. I thought she'd be at least like 108 years old. But she was actually probably in her like 20s or 30s. And I just had this question that I had to ask. So I sat down, and after a few moments, she nodded at me to begin to ask my question. And I just like this whole thing began water falling out of me. The experience that I had with my friends dying, and then with Dan dying, and how I started this blog and I had this idea about mortality, and I wanted to help people come alive and realize that we're going to die, and in all of my dreams to change the world and leave a legacy and all of this. And finally I get to my question. I looked at her, and at this point I have tears coming down my eyes, and I say, how can I be the best teacher of this message? And she looks at me and she smiles and she said, your life is the message.
Mm,
And it was just so not what I expected her to say. I expected her to have some wise words about how I should go out and speak to the masses. And she said, your life is the message. And so from that moment on, uh, I really zoom in, and it's given me a new perspective on what it means to change the world and what it means to follow our bliss and the importance of walking the talk. I can tell people what to do all day long. I can write a million books. I can do courses. But it means nothing. It means there's zero integrity in that unless I am walking the talk and living my true self and my highest expression of being. And it's a delicate dance because we think it's selfish to follow our bliss, to pursue the things that we want to pursue. We're like, oh, I have to be in service to others. And sure, do those things. Write the book, open the nonprofit, donate the money, mentor young people, do all of those things, great. But we cannot overlook our greatest opportunity to change the world on any given day. And that is, how do you show up? What is the energy that you bring to the interaction with your neighbor? What is the interaction that you bring to the people that you work with? You talked about that client that you're working with, that executive, and they may be feeling somewhat meaningless. They're like, I'm working in corporate and, I sell some software that like does not save babies or like save lives at all. Like, how can I possibly get meaning? And I say, it doesn't matter what our job is. We can be sweeping floors in, a storage facility, and we can have meaning, because any person that we come across, we have the opportunity to change their day, their week, their month, their year, and potentially their entire life with the way that we show up, with our attention, with our energy. And so I challenge you and everyone listening to think about following your bliss, differentiating yourself, having the courage to be bold, having the courage to dream and follow those dreams, and think about a stone dropped into water. Because every time you have the courage to be yourself, to be vibrant, to be present, to dream, to follow those dreams, you're like a stone into water, and you're creating a ripple effect that will go on far beyond that which you can ever imagine. And so do not underestimate your ability to change the world with the way that you show up. And the last thing I want to say on this, although I could talk about this for 15, 25 years, and I probably will be talking about this for 25 years, is that figuring out who you really are is a process of creation and destruction. We have to create. differentiate ourselves, be courageous, right? Do these projects and these hobbies and these hustles and side hustles and, do all this creation. But we also have to destroy. We have to destroy the denial that we live in. We have to destroy the lies that we tell ourselves. We have to destroy all the masks that we hide behind. But this process of creation and destruction of who we really are, this is the most important journey of our lives. And in doing so, we change the vibration of everyone around us and the world.
Oh my goodness. So inspiring, so powerful. I can tell that you are going to be doing this for the next 25, 35, 55 years. I love this so much. What you were sharing made me think of, I think it was Tim Ferriss who said that so many people talk about personal brand and they try and tailor it with words and marketing and graphics and all this stuff. And he was the one saying, your personal brand is simply the 3 or 4 things that the people around you think of when they think of you. So, what do people think of when they think of Kate? What do people think of when they think of Gregory? What do people think of when they think of you? If you're listening to this, that's your personal brand. And the way you change that is through changing how you live, how you show up for people. So, thank you for sharing that message. I needed to hear that because the way I'm creating my life is locking me into having to live the life that I want, getting to live the life that I want. Because here at the Dare to Dream podcast, talking about dreams, in my coaching practice, talking about how fortune favors the bold and the universe rewards bold action, it's the most positive form of pressure, peer pressure to walk the walk because we're talking the talk. So thank you for sharing that. And you gave me the perfect segue. I wanted to talk about how on the Dare to Dream podcast, we talk about the highs, we talk about the most amazing parts where everything fell into place, but then we also love going into the darkness, getting into the trenches. And you said that as you go through that destruction period, you have to take off masks. You have to take a look at yourself. And I want to ask yourself, what masks did you have to start taking off? And what were some of the low points along this epic adventure you've been on?
Oh man, so like I said, 2026 or 2014 was like the big awakening, and I traveled for those couple of years, and everything was great, and I was on this high, and my book was published in 2020, and that was really cool. And then 2022, I was the year that I decided I was going to not only go all in on entrepreneurship, so I was going to stop having a paycheck or a main hustle and go all into this work as an inspirer. It was also the year that I decided to get this RV, renovate it, and go out on the road. Well, those two things just exacerbated a major mask that I needed to look at. And I ended up going into the deepest depression of my adult life. And what I discovered about myself was that I had all of my self worth was wrapped up in my achievement. And at that time, or lack thereof, the year that I went all in on entrepreneurship, it was tough. I had published a workbook that was a companion to my book, totally flopped. I still think it's a great piece, but I think people don't want to buy something with work in the title. But I had put all this work and money and love and effort into this workbook after I'd had like a pretty good success with my first book, totally flopped. I had done a course that year that also totally flopped. I wasn't making the money that I needed to make. I was doing this new lifestyle in the RV that had tons of ups and downs, and I truly felt like God had forgotten about me, because I was thinking like, gosh, I did the corporate life. I was married. I owned a house. That didn't work out for me. And now I've charted off into this bold thing of being an inspirer and being an entrepreneur. And this isn't working out for me. And I genuinely like, I can't, it was just, I thought that God forgot about me and that there was nothing here on this earth for me. Like it was very, very serious. I was, you know, suicidal. I was depressed. I felt so alone, so empty, because I had all my self-worth wrapped up in what I achieved or what I didn't achieve. And I also let my mind and my negative thoughts run amok. And if you, like me, have struggled with negative thinking, you know that if you just begin to let negative thoughts take hold and take root, they just get deeper and deeper, and they start to go from thinking a negative thought once a week to every day to that's all you're thinking about all day, every day. And that's where I was at the end of 2022 was I'm worthless. Nobody buys my shit. Nothing's going to work out for me. And I don't even have a place on this earth. So what changed was I ended up I went to a Vipassana meditation retreat, which is one of those 10 days you're silent, you're meditating for like 8 hours a day. And just before that, on New Year's, I just had this realization that all of this misery that I felt like I was in, feeling forgotten by God, feeling like nothing was working out for me, it was just self created misery. And that I was just so in victim mentality. And so I took a good look and I actually imagined myself in a kiddie pool of shit, swimming around, like 3 feet tall, one of those blue pools, swimming around like, oh, everything's horrible. And I could just see in this visualization that like all I had to do was stand up and walk out. So what I did was I was like, I need to change this. This is up to me. Nobody's coming to save me. And so I did a bunch of things to change and, save my life, honestly. Like because I was thinking of unaliving myself. I mean, there was a lot of really like deep darkness happening. And the main things that I did was I hired a therapist and a coach. I took a depression supplement. It has like St. John's wort and lithium in it and a bunch of other things to kind of like get my brain chemistry to a certain point. And I started a daily, multiple times a day practice where every time a negative thought came into my mind, which was a lot, I would stop it and replace it with a positive, logical thought. So let's say I'm just doing something and I have this thought like, nobody loves me. It's like, no, Kate, some people do love you. And I would do that as many times as a day as it took. And like a muscle being strengthened over time, I found that the negative thoughts started to recede, that they started to go away, that I was only having to do it once a day, and then maybe once every couple of days. And that with some other things as far as like calling friends and having a support group, it ended up to that was the end of 2022 that started. We're now at the end of 2024, 2 years later. I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life. So I went in 2022 to being the most depressed I've ever been in my life to being the happiest I'm ever been in my life. And for those of you that are going through these horrible dark nights of the soul, I want you to remember nothing lasts forever. At that time, I truly thought there was no light at the end of the tunnel. That's why I was like, take me now. Like, there's nothing for me here. And just never forget that nothing stays the same. Good things end, bad things end. Again, this beautiful cycle of birth and death, beginnings and endings, that nothing lasts forever. And that you're meant to be here for a reason. I don't know what that reason is, but guess what? You were born, and that you're meant to be here for some reason.
And the fact that we're even here in the first place is wild from a scientific standpoint. But I can only imagine what it felt like for you after daring to dream, breaking away from corporate, writing a book, having that taste of, oh my goodness, this is who I'm supposed to be. This is how I can help people. Having that high and then having the low after that, I imagine was worse than if you would have just stayed in the corporate job that you never liked, because you had a taste of the success and then now it was, okay, what am I here for? Did God forget about me? And it sounds like realizing that you were putting yourself in that kiddie pool full of shit. Thank you for that beautiful visual. Realizing that you were putting yourself there and that you could stand up, get out, hopefully wash off, use some soap, and that plus building up those mental biceps of recognizing the negative thoughts, stopping them, and replacing them with a positive. It feels like that was a really powerful toolkit that you created for yourself.
Yeah, and this is what's really important for the listeners of your podcast, Gregory, because we are on the Dare to Dream podcast. And so your listeners are people who are dreamers, who are change makers, who have, big goals for yourselves in life. And we see over and over people who do not address their self-worth early on before they get success. So I started a program called Survive Your Success because we see people, these big dreamers, these people that want to, achieve these amazing things in life. if they don't address your self-worth and take it from extrinsic validation to intrinsic meaning early on in your success journey, you will end up emptier than before. You can think of how many, celebrities, leaders, change makers who later in life they end up addicted to drugs and alcohol. They end up unaliving themselves. Think about it. If you haven't done the work to build your self-worth from an intrinsic standpoint, and you go along and you start achieving more success, you start getting more external validation of that's why you're worthy, because you got this award, or you made this amount of money, or you made this milestone in your career. So you just are getting more and more propped up on this your external value. Then when you get to a certain point, you've lost the plot of any intrinsic value whatsoever, and you feel so empty. So this is why self-worth work is so important for people who are dreamers and change makers and who have big success planned and written for your life. And so what I had to do was, I one of the practices I did was, I imagined that I never spoke on another stage, I never wrote another book. Just made a meager, livable amount of money, and I lived in this tiny house. This is my visualization that I did over and over. And all I did to prop up my self-esteem was to bring soup to my imaginary neighbor when she was sick. So all I had to do was be like, Kate is valuable because she was born, because I have this funny way that my eye crinkles up when I smile, like you do, because I have my weird gifts and idiosyncrasies and flaws and, talents and all these things that I'm interested in. That's why I'm valued. This intrinsic value, and I just bring my soup to my neighbor when I'm sick, and that's enough to make me feel that I'm changing the world. And once I did that visualization like 100 times, and I could really genuinely say, like, that's enough. That is enough to say that I am a worthy person. Then I knew I was ready for success. And that's when success even started to manifest at an exponentially higher rate for me. When I became at peace with, I don't need any of that. I want it. It's going to be and is a hell of an adventure to speak on these amazing stages and sell these books and do all of these things. It's great. I love it, but I don't need it, because I know I'm worthy just because I was born, and just because I'm this unique manifestation of Kate Manser. So if you have big dreams in your life, I challenge you to do that visualization, or whatever version of it resonates for you, where you can really see your intrinsic value without all these external aspects of achievement, and then you'll know you're ready.
So many people, myself included, need to hear that message, because self-worth and tying my own worth into my achievements, that my value as a human, as a man, is only based on my achievements, is something that I've been battling for a long, long time. And I think I'm making progress on it, but I really appreciate you sharing that meditation, that if nothing else, you can wake up every day and help one person, whether it's bringing soup to your neighbor or smiling at a stranger on the street. That's one of my favorite hobbies, is smiling at people. Even when they don't smile back at me, I get so much joy out of it. That I needed to hear that. I know people in the audience needed to hear that. And that actually leads me into a question that I wanted to ask about that came up a little earlier, is how are you dealing with the haters? Because I'm at the point where I feel like I'm just about to start getting haters as I start to lean more into what feels true to me, as I differentiate myself, be less generic. And I know they're going to come, and I know it's going to be so hard for me because I am a people pleaser through and through. So how are you dealing with the haters?
I so the You Might Die Tomorrow movement, like I said, it has encountered haters from day one, and it hasn't been like overwhelming. I'm not getting death threats. I'm not getting like people swarming my social media saying all these negative things. But there's always people who you can tell they don't like it, or they tell me that they don't like it. So I have a friend, actually. She's a friend from the first high school that I went to in Iowa. And, when I started the You Might Die Tomorrow movement and started blogging on it and selling t-shirts and all of this stuff, she was always on my social media. She was not on board at all. She just was, you could tell she would never like it wasn't like hate, but it was definitely, she was always commenting like constructive criticism, like, I don't get this and this is why, or this is why I don't agree with this. And it was good. It was good constructive criticism, and we would engage in dialogue, but it was very clear she was not on board with it at all. And this went on for like 6 years. So she was always commenting, and we would go through this thing where, and so her mom died of cancer, unexpectedly at a young age, and so she was also grieving at this time, and the you might die tomorrow message just didn't freaking resonate with her at all. Well, imagine my surprise when 6 years later, one day I get an order on my website, the You Might Die Tomorrow website, for like $150 worth of t-shirts and mugs and stickers, and her name is on the order. And I'm like, what? I would have never thought. So I call her up and I'm like, why are you ordering all this stuff? I didn't think that you were a fan of this at all. She's like, Kate, I finally get it. My mom would have wanted me to live my most vibrant life. My mom doesn't want me to be sad. I can honor my mom best by living fully today. She's like, my husband and I are buying a school bus and we're going to renovate it, and we're going to take our 12-year-old son out in the summer and go on like an RV adventure. And that was just this really cool moment for me where I realized that we're planting seeds in people's minds, whether and actually we're planting seeds in the minds, I think even more so, of the people who are the haters, right, who give us the negativity or the clapbacks, or talk about why they don't agree with us. And so it comes back to what the nun said, which is, if you are truly living your life in integrity, and if you're walking the talk of your message, and you in your gut, I'm pointing to my stomach, my gut here, if you feel good and that you're doing the right thing, you got to keep going. You got to keep going. And you never know when one of your haters will come around and that message will finally hit, and their life will be forever profoundly changed.
So it sounds like how you're dealing with the haters is waiting it out, playing the waiting game, because at one point something's going to change and they're going to become a huge fan, at least in that case. Maybe not every time.
Maybe not every time, but we all got to come to grips with death someday. And, we all have to come to grips one day with whether or not we dared to dream in our lives. And so I just think that although our message can be taken defensively, it's typically taken defensively by the people who are maybe living in the most denial, or have the most limiting beliefs. And so it makes sense that they will be defensive and that they will have negative things to say. But and my message isn't for everybody all the time, and that's totally fine. Come around when you're ready to hear it.
It makes sense. It makes sense that if you are grieving or you're expecting the loss of someone, hearing the message, you might die tomorrow or they might die tomorrow, might be really triggering and hard for them. But I love what you're saying around, it might not be the right time. It might not be for you, but it's for so many people. And for it is the people that it is for, it's for in a big way. So I love the message. You mentioned something earlier that we skimmed over, and I want to come back to. You mentioned that you worked at Google, which is obviously a company everyone's heard of. I imagine it's incredibly hard to get a job there. It's impressive. What did you learn from working at Google? And also, you mentioned these other huge brands like Indeed and Carl's Jr. What did you learn from your time in the corporate world? And the reason why I want to drill into this is because I think there's people out there who might say, oh, you could do that because of XYZ, but I can't do that because I'm at Google, I'm at SpaceX, I'm at this amazing company. I can't possibly change my life because I'd be giving up too much. They might have the golden handcuffs and be stuck. So what'd you learn from your time at those prestigious companies?
Yeah, I mean, it's a delicate balance, because a lot of times we feel this pull to want to jump ship and do the thing that I did ultimately, which was to quit the job and go do this other thing or go live in an RV or whatever. But I'm here to tell you, as someone who has done both of those things, that number one, they're not all they're cracked up to be. They definitely don't solve all of the problems, and in fact, they create a lot of their own problems. But what I've learned, especially like from Dan, is that if you have a desire to maybe leave and jump ship, but you're not feeling like you're ready for it, you have to look at the next thing, which is, how can I make the most of what I have? if I'm at a corporate job and I'm not saving babies or curing diseases or whatever, how can I make meaning and enjoy myself? Because this is, this is like 50% or 40% of our lives being at work. And Dan showed me that we have to pursue our hobbies. We have to, and do things outside of work that light us up. If we're just doing work and like watching Netflix, what do we have in our lives? Right. And so we have to, even though we're tired, even though we give a lot of energy to our work, number one, we have to pursue our outside hobbies and light ourselves up in the time that we do have outside of work. And number two, the other thing that I realized is, again, going back to the power that we have as energetic beings to change the world no matter where you are. Maybe your life's purpose right now is to change somebody's life at work. I don't know. Maybe there's somebody there that needs to see your energy or see your courage or see how you're pursuing your hobby or see how you come to work every day in a good mood, even though you have shit going on in your life. And that's going to radically change the way that you do it. So, how can you change the world exactly where you are? And that's a process that you can you can assess on your own. Like at any point in our lives, I don't think there's any point in our lives where we don't have an opportunity to create meaning. So I don't know what my one great purpose is in life other than to discover who I really am and make the world a better place. And I can do that on the macro level of taking big leaps or inspiring the people, like you said, smiling at strangers and like really engaging in conversation with the customer service agent and asking like, how are you, and genuinely listening to the answer. These things seem small and they're mentioned so much, they seem pithy, but it is truly your way to change the world on any given day.
One thing that I've definitely mentioned on this podcast before, but is not as common that I've started doing is on runs. I will go up for high fives with strangers as they pass me. And it's really probably 40-60 in terms of 60% of the time they're like, who the hell is this man? What is he trying to do? 40% of the time they see that I'm going up for a high five. Their entire face just lights up and we hit that high five. And I swear for the next mile and a half, I just feel so much energy because you just made their day better. They made your day better. It's fantastic. So if you're listening and you're going on a run soon, you can give that a try. So as we come into the tail part of this podcast episode, I just wanted to ask, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you wanted to share about?
Oh my goodness. I really want to bring up again the importance of feeling alive and exploring what that means to you. So a lot of us think about meditation and we think that we have to be sitting in a dark room in the lotus position and have our hands in a particular position and like have our eyes closed and be repeating a mantra or have a completely clear blue sky mind. And like that type of meditation is great. I've taught that meditation and done that type of meditation for years. However, there's also what I call alive meditations, which is think about an activity that you have in your life that when you do it, you forget about time. Your problems seem to lift from your shoulders. You enter in a flow state. You have these like feelings of goodness and well-being going through you. Like, some people say running, like some people say vacuuming. What is it for you, Gregory?
Having conversations, to be honest. That's why I started a podcast, because I feel like podcasting is a cheat code for human connection. You get to sit down with someone for over an hour. It's uninterrupted. No one's texting. Occasionally a security guard knocks on the door and tries to get involved, but there's usually very little distraction. So it's having conversations like these that really make me feel alive.
Mm, yeah, and it's just that flow, that human connection, right? Like being in the present moment, listening to the person, seeing their facial expressions, thinking about, what they're saying and where the conversation is going to go. It's this hyper present experience. So I want you to think about when you do your podcast, that this is a meditation for you. If your thing is, and you're listening and your thing is running, when you go out and you're running, you're just like, you're in that flow, you're in that world. A lot of people say playing music, like playing guitar or piano. A lot of people say, like I said, doing dishes or vacuuming. Typically, it's something that requires a lot of your senses at once. So when you're playing music, you're using your brain to think about the music. You have the tactile experience of your fingers on the strings. Maybe you're using your voice. You're using obviously your ears and your eyes as well. We have this full sensory experience. It's this experience of being present. That is totally a meditation. It's totally an alive meditation. And so when you do those things, add that extra layer of awareness of like, yeah, this is training me to feel alive. Because what I want you to feel is as you train yourself through podcasting or playing music or running or whatever it is to really be in that present moment, and you're aware of that, you're going to start to feel that level of awareness in your everyday life. And that's like, it's like I've been practicing this for years now where I've been training myself to be super present through walking meditations and these alive meditations such that at any moment I can drop into essentially feeling like I'm on mushrooms, okay? Like I'm really passionate about drug-free psychedelic experiences, which podcasting, like that's one of them. So bring this new awareness to your life of what feeling alive means to you. Is it being super present? What activities make you feel alive? What do you notice that's different about when you feel alive versus when you're on autopilot? And the more that you engage in that and the more that you're aware of that, the more you're going to begin to feel profoundly aware and alive in the average everyday moments of your life, such as that you won't have any more average everyday moments. Everything is this like profound gift. And you'll end up like me and you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh my God, look at this day. I'm alive. I'm not dead. This is incredible. Oh my God, look at that leaf. Look at that cloud. Like, it's amazing. And I want to bring you along on this incredible, wild, and wonderful journey.
That is an amazing message. And I know so many people need to hear it because I think thinking about what makes you come alive is easier than thinking about what's my purpose. That can be such a heavy question. And maybe that's the best place to find your purpose is starting to tap into what makes me come alive. What are the small things? And then gradually, what are the bigger things? And that would be a good jumping off point for that.
Yeah, that quote that you said earlier. Do not ask the world what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you feel alive. And then follow that because what the world needs is more people who have come alive. So I started as the woman talking about death, obsessed with mortality 10 years ago. And now I'm the person who is obsessed with being alive. And thinking about death is one way to get there, right? I'm not off of death. Mortality awareness is still a part of my everyday existence. I still think about dying and that deadline that we have that we don't know. And I use that as motivation. But what I realize is that my passion isn't death. My passion is being alive. And thinking about death is just one of many, many ways to get there, like podcasting and conversations and running and adventure and presence and bold action and daring to dream.
Well, Kate, you are very alive. It's obvious to anyone who interacts with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I realized that I love you so much the moment when you were so passionately talking that you lost one of your smiley face earrings and you kept
I
going.
did.
That was a beautiful moment and I respect
Here
it
it
so much.
is. Yeah, it's like, okay, right? We just got to roll with the punches.
Just unfazed. So thank you so much for being here today. Where can people go to learn more about you and all the amazing things you're doing?
Oh, it's an honor to connect with you, Gregory. And like, yeah, we're totally kindred spirits. We're going to be in each other's path and orbit for sure. And if you are listening and you like what you're hearing and what I'm laying down, follow me on Instagram or TikTok. I am the Alive Kate on both. KateManser.com is my website, and I give talks and I lead walking meditations. You can find my meditations online as well, and just get in my orbit. Let's feel alive together and explore what the hell that means to each and every one of us.
Yes. Thank you so much, Kate. And thank you to everyone tuning in with us today. As always, I love you guys so much, and we'll see you in the next episode. If you liked this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the Dare to Dream podcast on YouTube. You want to make sure you don't miss out on any of the amazing episodes we're going to be coming out with in the future. And if you liked this video specifically, please give it a like, leave a comment, let us know what you loved. Thank you so much for being here. We love you guys.